From the things that were said this morning, I'm sure that everybody knows that I'm interested in the Old Testament. The Old Testament is kind of a hidden thing to us many times. Maybe we don't realize that, and I counted this up, 77.4% of the Bible is the Old Testament. Only 22.6% of the Bible is New Testament. And yet we don't spend very much time in the Old Testament. It's sort of like saying 3/4 of God's revelation don't really make any difference. Well, it does make a difference. Why do we not study the Old Testament like we do the New? Various times, various people give various answers to that. One of the answers that they give is, well, we're not living under that. No, we're not living under that, but it's kind of like saying that we're not living under the old Articles of Confederation in our country. So the history of our country is not of any use to me. Well, yes, the history is very, very useful to us because we see where our roots are. We see where we came from. We see what the past was. We see what the implications of the past and the things that the past has done that affect us today. Christianity cannot exist without the Old Testament. And yet it's pretty hard to get people to stop and read the Old Testament. Why? Well, they say it's boring. It has so many names in there that I can't pronounce, and I join you in that because there are a lot of names in there I can't pronounce either. I do remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I can get those. But there's so many of those names that I can't pronounce. And so people don't study the Old Testament because I think one reason is they haven't been exposed to the Old Testament very much. Let me start this part of the lesson by asking a question. What is the pivotal point in the Bible? Now, I didn't say what is the most important event in the Bible, but what is the pivotal point in the Bible? Different people give different answers to that. Some people say, oh, it's the birth of Christ. Other people say, no, it's not the birth of Christ, it's his death. Well, no, it's not even his death, it's his resurrection. And then other people will say, well, the pivotal point in the Bible is the beginning of the church in Acts 2. And then various other answers are given about what is the pivotal point. What is the point around which all of the rest of the Bible revolves? What do you think, Joe? I don't want first few, I want the point. No. The pivotal point is the call of Abraham. Now, some people will disagree with me about that, I'm quite sure. But I want us to think tonight about this pivotal point in the Old Testament, the call of Abraham, and I want to mention to you why I'm saying that this is the way it really is. A lot of scholars, by the way, agree that this is the point around which the entire Bible revolves. The word sin is only used one time before the call of Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. And then it's used in a very casual way almost. Sin crouches at the door. And that's the only mention of it. Yes, sin existed, and God's wrath was against the people of Noah's day and so forth, but the word sin itself doesn't occur but one time prior to this. Well, why am I saying that this is the pivotal point? I want to read to you the first 3 verses of Genesis chapter 12. I want you to stop and think, why is that so important? Here it is. And the Lord has said to Abram, leave your country, your people, your father's household. Go to a land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and those that curse you, I will curse. Here it is, folks. And all people on earth will be blessed through you. Why is that the pivotal point? The pivotal point, the reason that's the pivotal point is because everything else in the rest of the Bible, all through the rest of the Old Testament and all through the New Testament, with the possible exception of the book of Job, all come back to the fulfillment of this one promise. For that reason, everything relates to this in a very dynamic and very important way. Everything in the Bible comes back to the fulfillment of this call and this promise to Abraham. The entire history of Israel comes back to this call and this promise. The life of Christ comes back to this call and this promise. The crucifixion and the resurrection finally come back to this call and this promise. The mission of the church comes back to this. The basis of evangelism comes back to this. All of God's work in the history of Israel finally comes back to this call and this promise. Why do I say that? I say that for this reason. God said, every family on earth will be blessed through you, Abraham. Now, that's an all-encompassing thing. Now, the question is constantly brought up then, what did God do through history in order to bring this about? That all of the families of the earth will be blessed through Abraham. Stop and think about some of these things. This is the first time that a glimmer of hope, because of the introduction of evil into the world, Adam and Eve, and the Tower of Babel and the flood, and all of the things that were spoken of in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, where it's so vivid that man has become so wicked. Not in any of those first 11 chapters is there a statement about hope. The only thing that even comes close is at the time of Adam and Eve's transgression there in the Garden of Eden. This statement is made in Genesis 3:15. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head and you will strike his heel. Very, very vague. Very vague. But there is some kind of a little glimmer of hope there, but nothing else is said to give hope to the world until you get to the 12th chapter of Genesis, where God says to Abraham, "In you, all the families of the earth will be blessed." And so God is working all through the rest of his word. He is working toward the fulfillment of that promise. And after that promise was fulfilled in Christ, everything looks back to that in reference to evangelism and carrying this message to the whole world. Well, there are some interesting things that develop here. For example, we begin finding out some things about sin. And we begin reading the Old Testament law. And we might stop and say to ourselves, why all these sacrifices? Why all of these regulations? Why all of these ceremonies in the law? Well, there's a reason. Because God is going to use that, as Paul speaks of in the 3rd chapter of Galatians. God is going to use all of that as a discipline to bring people to Christ, to bring the Jews to Christ. Well, you see, it comes right back to this whole idea that I'm going to bless all of the people in the world through you, Abraham. And so everything begins to revolve around this whole idea. Then Paul tells us, in Romans 3, Paul tells us that through the law, we became conscious of sin. Through the law, Old Testament, We became conscious of sin. And then also he talks about the fact that the law showed sin to be exceedingly evil, exceedingly sinful. So the Old Testament, again, is very, very important here. Now, there's an interesting statement made in the first chapter of Romans that relates very strongly to this, I think. Two statements, as a matter of fact, in the first chapter of Romans and then in the fourth chapter of Romans. In the first chapter of Romans, he speaks of the gospel as a God's power to save. You remember that? Everybody remembers that passage probably. The gospel is the power of God to save to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For therein is written the righteousness of God from faith unto faith. And here he says, for it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Okay? The righteous will live by faith. Do you know what that means? Do you know what the context of that thing is? It's one of the few times in the Old Testament where the word faith occurs. And if you go back to the book of Habakkuk, you find out that Habakkuk was very displeased with the way God was arranging things. He thought that God ought to come down and cleanse the earth or cleanse the people or punish wickedness within the Israelite nation. And God says, I've got plans to do that. And then Habakkuk says, well, Lord, why don't you take all this evil that's all around us in other nations and punish these people? And then God says, I'm going to do that too. But Habakkuk, here's the thing. He said, you need to trust in me to do what I have promised to do. And so Habakkuk says, then the righteous will live by faith. Faith in what God promised to do. Well, in a sense, that whole thing comes back to this 12th chapter of Genesis there about God's promise that through Abraham all the families of the earth would be blessed. And so over and over this idea comes up. These are reasons why I'm saying we need to study the Old Testament. We need to look at the Old Testament. I would suggest to you this. Now the Old Testament is made up of all kinds of literature, the prophetic books, the Psalms, the Proverbs, and all this sort of thing. But I would like to suggest to you that the first 17 books of the Old Testament, going through the book of Esther, that contains the whole history of the Jewish nation. I'd suggest that we sit down and read those things. This first 17 books, Genesis through Esther. Now, what does that tell us? Well, it tells us about the beginning. It tells us about the creation. It gives us the law. And you're going to think it in terms, the law is so very, very dull because it's all these sacrifices and things like that. Think in terms of God is using this to fulfill his promise. God is using the law and the sacrifices to ultimately train his people so they'll see the importance of sin and the devastating character of sin. And then you're going to come to the book of Numbers. The first part of the book of Numbers and part of the of other parts just have lists of people. This one begat this one and this one and this one, genealogies. I would suggest you skip those in reference to what I'm talking about here and read the historical narratives as you go along. And you're going to say to yourself, well, why did this happen to the people? Because God was training them. Why was he training them? Because he was going to fulfill his promise through that nation. Why is it that we don't have in the Bible the way God dealt with the Gentile nations and all the nations of the world? We just have the Jewish nation, and they're a very small nation. They occupy just a little strip of land there in Palestine, and they were not really very good people. Why is it that it just deals with that? It doesn't say anything about the Romans or the British or the ancient people of of the Far East or anything like this, nothing in there about that. Why? Because these are the people through whom God is going to ultimately bless all the nations of the world. That's the reason that the Hebrews were chosen. And that's the reason that we have the history of these people. And as you go through that, you'll find that, in the book of Judges, for example, these people constantly left God and God brought them back. They left God again, God brought them back. Why? Because that's the nation through whom he is going to work to bring about his promise. Stop and think for a minute. Abraham, his son Isaac, his son Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons who made 12 tribes of people. And it was through that lineage that God was going to bring about this great promise that he made. And so he dealt with them, and he tells us about his dealing with them. Why did he tell us about those things? He told us about those people and those events because he wanted us to see how he was dealing with them to ultimately bring about this promise that in your seed all the families of the earth would be blessed. Now, let's take a little different look at the thing. If we don't understand the Old Testament, if we don't read and study the Old Testament, we'll find that the New Testament is very, very difficult for us. And there'll be a lot of things. We will reduce the New Testament to a bunch of slogans. All things work together for good. I like that one. And that becomes kind of a slogan for me. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten. That's a good one too. And so I like that one. But we don't look at context. Instead, we look at slogans. Now, in reference to this, let me just give you an illustration. I went through, while I was preparing this lesson, I went through the Bible, the New Testament, and I noticed that in the book of Hebrews, this is just the book of Hebrews, in the book of Hebrews, there are 35 specific statements relating to the Old Testament. Now, if you read the book of Hebrews and you don't have any idea what that's talking about, you'll never understand the book of Hebrews. You can do the same thing with the book of Romans, because constantly Paul is talking about Old Testament in the book of Romans. The book of Galatians is somewhat the same way. But then I went and looked at the book of Hebrews and took a look at the 11th chapter of Hebrews. And I counted this. In the 11th chapter alone, the writer of Hebrews makes reference to 21 different people and events from the Old Testament. Just that one chapter. 21 people and events. 13 of these are specific things, just specific references, where he says, for example, by faith Noah did this. By faith Abraham did this. By faith Isaac did this, and so forth. If I don't know those stories, I won't have any idea of what this man, this writer, is talking to me about. Oh, I can read it. Yeah, that sounds like a great thing. He lived by faith. But I won't understand why the writer of Hebrews would specifically talk about this person in reference to the faith of that person. And so the Old Testament turns out to be a very, very important part of the Bible for us. Well, I mentioned these 17 books. Read these 17 books, and again, I made a little percentage here. They comprise only about 52% of the Old Testament. If you want the history, if you want where all of these people that I just mentioned in Hebrews and many of the events, if you want to see those things, read the history. Now, it's made up of the first 17 books of the Old Testament. Well, I want to encourage you to make up for yourself kind of a reading schedule and go through the first 17 books of the Old Testament. Read them with this idea in mind. I want, you'll, with the first 11 chapters of Genesis, you'll have the creation, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, the flood, the Tower of Babel. You'll have all of this stuff in the first 11 chapters. And then you come to that 12th chapter and sit down and notice what happened in fulfillment of those, of the promise that God made to Abraham. Now, when you do that, and when you read the Old Testament history with that idea in mind, the thing makes so much good sense. Because we're seeing how God worked with these people, how God revealed himself to these people for the purpose of ultimately bringing Christ into the world and providing atonement for our sins. And so this turns out to be a very, very important thing for us. And I think you can, I mean this quite literally, I think you can become addicted to the Old Testament. Once you read it and think about it in these terms, the Old Testament just comes to life. And these people who were so unfamiliar with to us, they become very familiar to us. These people who were so remote and about whom we know so little, they begin coming to life. And we begin understanding what it is to read about the Samson and Hezekiah and Jephthah and Samuel and David. And we see something about the life of these people and how they made contribution to this whole thing. So, I encourage you then, look at the Old Testament. Read the Old Testament. See how God works with people through the Old Testament. And I honestly believe that if you're not careful, you will become addicted to a study of the Old Testament. Let's stand together and sing a song, please.